Well, good morning, and again, thank you for joining us for this morning's informational webinar on learning more about Wipfli's Human Resource Advisory Services for WBA member banks. As you know, WBA is responsive to the needs of its membership and strives to introduce products and services that will be beneficial to its membership in addressing various business issues. In response to the many inquiries WBA received each year regarding HR services, WBA has endorsed Wipfli's HR advisory services, and we're thrilled to be here today to share with you how we can be of support and assistance. And as Mary indicated, as questions pop up, please go ahead and use the Q&A section and submit those questions to Mary, and we'll address those questions at the end of our morning together. What I'd like to do is introduce Wipfli. And for those of you who are not familiar with Wipfli, we are Wipfli CPA and consultants, and our organization has been around for a number of years, and I am quite certain that many of you are familiar with Wipfli. We are providing tax, audit, and accounting services, and then we have a large consulting division, of which Human Resources Consulting is one. In fact, we have been providing human resources consulting services to financial institution clients well in excess of 20 years. As such, we bring together a team of experienced HR consultants that are able to be responsive to your specific needs and concerns that you have with your particular bank. As we talk today, I want you to understand that we tailor our services to the specific needs of each financial institution. While HR has some core functional areas that need to be addressed, each of your needs will be specific and unique to your organization, and we will tailor those services specifically in that regard. We also provide current and practical human resources support and assist you in aligning those with your strategic goals and objectives. In short, we like to bring best practices, effective tools, and professional advice to your financial institution. As we look at the key objectives of HR, I always like to talk about what those might be and why do we want to make sure that our policies and procedures are aligned. The key objectives of HR are to align those human resources programs with the strategic goals and objectives of the bank to improve bank performance and to attract, retain, and motivate our staff. We also wish to advance the desired culture of the bank, and in many ways, it starts with the people function and ensuring the practices and the programs that we have in place are really supportive to the culture that we wish to advance. And of course, from a compliance perspective, we certainly wish to mitigate and manage our exposure to risk, which can ultimately lead in some occasions to litigation, which of course we wish to avoid at all costs. When looking at the HR services that we have available in our offering through our Wipfli HR advisory services, I want to walk through the process that will unfold. Generally speaking, we will begin with a high-level human resources review of existing policies, procedures, systems, and compliance issues to really identify how well each of those areas are helping or hindering the bank's approach to effective human resources management. An HR review gives us the opportunity to assist you in working with us to tailor the services to meet your specific needs and to maximize the financial investment as well as your internal resources. The HR review gives us a high-level perspective of how things are functioning within the bank, enabling us to enter into exclusive dialogue with the bank to identify where are your priority items, what approach and tactic would be the best way to manage those particular situations, and craft the strategy and the approach that we would take with you in order to meet those specific needs. Whether your bank has a dedicated HR professional or someone who has human resources responsibility as part of their job, we can certainly help. One of the items that we're particularly proud of when working with a financial institution is that we are able to leverage the current human resources professional and provide them support and assistance. With the pressures that are on financial institutions today, the economic realities of what's happening in business and industry, as well as the significant challenge in managing your human resources talent and resources, we often find ourselves partnering with a human resources professional. We tend to partner with our human resources professional to bring to them particularly important services that perhaps they haven't had the availability to implement in their bank due to other pressures and priorities that may be on them at that particular time. So therefore, we may enter into that relationship with a very specific project focus. We work closely with the human resources professional to ensure all services align and that we can be supportive to what their goals and objectives are as it relates to the specific goals and objectives of the bank. We often find in community banking that there is not a dedicated human resources person. Rather, we have an individual who has absorbed the human resources responsibility as part of their job. Or on some occasions, we will find that the human resources responsibility has been divided between a couple of different people within the financial institution, also as secondary or tertiary roles and responsibility. In having conversations with those individuals, they will often express concern about whether or not they're maintaining their relevancy, if you will, and current knowledge, skill, and ability with all the changes in the employment law landscape. So whatever the situation is at your bank, we are certainly in a position to tailor the services to meet the specific need. At the end of the day, our goal is to provide support and assistance in ensuring that you are comfortable with and confident in the effective management of your human resources pool of talent. So let's explore those services a bit further. The services that we have available really address the core functional areas of human resources. So if we were to look at the continuum of human resources management, we are able to start on the far left, which is the compliance core functional areas of human resources, and travel that continuum to the organizational development section of human resources. That can look at organizational structure and design. Looking at the core functional areas of HR, I will share with you what some of those items are, such as job description development. One of the primary areas of concern we're finding when organizations and looking for talent, they need to be able to accurately define and capture the role and responsibility for the organization. In looking at the performance management system, performance management systems are directly linked to job descriptions. So in the absence of a job description, we can question or challenge, are we effective in the performance management tools that we have in place? So therefore, job descriptions in our mind's eye serve as a foundational tool within human resources that helps align and position the bank on any number of issues, whether that be performance, compensation, training and development, succession, et cetera. Speaking of performance management, we can also assist you in crafting a performance management system. What are your goals and objectives? What is your philosophy with performance management? We'll certainly share our philosophies with you and provide guidance in terms of what we have seen as best practices in other financial institutions that you may wish to incorporate. We'll work closely with you to ensure that the tools align and are not overly cumbersome, for lack of a better term, unless you want a very sophisticated system, which we can certainly do for you as well. Another significant area of support that we can provide is compensation system design. We often enter into conversations with our banking clients that are asking the question, am I paying competitively? Particularly if they find one of two situations happening. One, if they're experiencing high levels of turnover, there may be a question as to whether or not they're paying competitively. On the other side, it may be one of the situations where maybe you're not experiencing a high level of turnover, no one's leaving the organization. Then we might want to take a look to see if you're being overly aggressive in the market. At the end of the day, in this particular situation, we really want to ensure that you're comfortable and confident with the knowledge in terms of where you are paying relative to the market so that you can be fair, competitive, and conscientiously aligned with your compensation philosophy. We're also able to review and update the employee handbook and your HR policies. We'll have communications and discussions with various key players within the organization to better understand what the practices are to ensure that the employee handbook is aligned with practice. I must say that we're not legal counsel, and therefore at some point in time it may be appropriate to have your legal counsel review the handbook to ensure its overall compliance in particular areas. We can be a great resource in reviewing and calling out those items that are of particular concern to employees, helping to craft a brand new job description or rewrite and update that employee handbook as appropriate. We're also able to assist with recruitment and selection. For those of you who have attempted to recruit, we know what a challenging situation this can be in this competitive market. In particular, we know that compliance people are worth their weight in gold right now, as well as some of the commercial lenders, the solid, strong-performing commercial lenders, credit analysts, et cetera. So we certainly understand some of the challenges that you have in front of you and want to work, again, hand in glove to better understand your environment to help assist you in the recruitment and selection process for key talent and entry-level talent. In addition, we are able to assist you with employee relations, corrective action and termination, those employee communications, and employee record management. In many ways, much of this is done through that day-to-day advice. We are but a phone call away. So there are different ways that you can access our services. You can certainly look at it from the perspective of, Julia, we have this situation. We're not exactly sure how to respond to it. I would love to have another form of opinion in looking at this particular situation. Perhaps you have an employee who's experiencing some attendance issues. Perhaps you have an employee who all of a sudden attitudinal shift has occurred, which is resulting in some undesired behavior. We're able to be but a phone call away to have those discussions in terms of what might be some approaches, some ideas to move forward. That day-to-day advice, I think, is probably one of the most valuable aspects of the service that's available to you. Whether you're a dedicated human resources professional that's looking for another perspective in terms of how to address a situation, or that individual who's absorbing the role and responsibility and might not have the answer at the tip of your tongue or wanting to explore other avenues that might be available to you, again, we are a resource that can be of support. Employee record management, certainly we want to take a look at your personnel files to ensure that those are appropriately managed and make suggestions to you. There are some watch-outs with employee files, and in order to ensure solid compliance, we will review those and offer comment and help restructure those files as is appropriate. Certainly, we are able to help you with succession planning, organizational development, staff planning, and any other number of human resources issues. I am proud to say that with the depth and talent of our staff, there is virtually no area of HR that we can't be of support and assistance with you on from a day-to-day and functional area of response. Let's take a look at a case study. We have a community bank with $175 million in assets with 45 employees representing approximately 15 positions, exclusive of executive management. There has been expressions of concern regarding the human resources, practices, and management. The president and the CFO currently handle all human resources matters, and they realize and understand that the pace with which employment law has changed or the shift in the market is giving them some pause. They have also been approached by others who perceive perhaps some level of favoritism within the organization, and they want to be able to explore that. The handbook was last updated in 2004. Job descriptions were last updated in 2006. Yet in conversation with the organization, they're saying, well, you know, I don't know if they're really updated in as much as they were reviewed and the dates were changed on the job descriptions to show that they were updated. Performance reviews are not conducted. The prior leadership of the organization did not necessarily believe in performance management and therefore did not incorporate that into their structure. The new leadership team, if you will, granted these folks had been there for a while, were very much supportive to performance management. They had other items that they were addressing at that point in time, tackled those issues, and we're now changing our focus to the human resources area. The organization has low turnover. That's another situation that is of interest. Whenever we have a situation with high turnover and low turnover, you certainly wish to explore that. There was also that uncertainty as to the competitiveness of compensation. And the concerns that were being expressed indicated that morale for the bank was on a downward slide and that there was that perception of favoritism, that there wasn't a fair and consistent process to administering the human resources practices. I like to call this in some ways as killing them with kindness. This was a situation where the leadership of the organization had made individual decisions without a consistent application of policy and procedure. So in a particular situation, they were being very kind and generous to an employee, and in another situation, similar but different as they always are, the same type of accommodation, if you will, the same type of acknowledgement or the same bend to the policy that was in place wasn't being made, which started to challenge the morale of the organization and cause that downward slide. This organization did not have a dedicated human resources professional, and we're looking for support and assistance, recognizing that there's a finite dollar that can be spent in addressing some of these issues. So let's talk about our approach and the results. We went in and we talked with the president and CEO as well as that CFO to gain an understanding of what they were specifically looking for. We conducted a human resources review to confirm and identify what, if any, other issues existed within the bank that might need to have attention. Communication was identified as one of the primary concerns, despite the fact that the president and CFO were actively striving to communicate. As we all know, in any type of relationship, when there's two or more people involved, communication always bubbles up as a concern. And therefore, when we're managing multiple employees, particularly in so many of your situations where you have multiple locations, we need to be able to craft a strategy to impact effectively the level of communication and to advance the culture that we're looking to have within our places of business. So after conducting the human resources review, we created a prioritized action plan in terms of, in some cases, what was the low-hanging fruit, if you will, that could have the greatest amount of impact in the organization and target the greatest number of employees and try to bolster that morale and bolster the function of the human resources area. So one of the primary areas that we focused on in year one, and they elected to take a 2-year approach. In the third year, we can talk a little bit about that as we move forward. But in year one, they decided to develop a new employee handbook reflective of current and intended practice. What they found is that their handbook was so old, it was from 2004, so it was a number of years old, and no longer reflected the practice. And they no longer understood what the policy truly meant or even what the intended intent of that policy was. In fact, I have a little smile on my face in terms of we reviewed the handbook, and I looked at the handbook and I said, oh, my gosh, this is great. Take a look at this one policy. And the person I was talking to chuckled and said, oh, no, we don't have all those recycling containers here. We just thought the policy looked good, so we incorporated that into the employee handbook. Well, of course, my red flag goes up and says, so we have policies that don't reflect practice, which can be of a significant concern. So the review of that handbook gave me the foundational information to assist me in moving forward with the development of a new employee handbook reflective of those current and intended practices. Alignment in that particular regard is critical. From there, we took the employee handbook and distributed it to the employees after it was appropriately reviewed by legal counsel and held employee meetings. And we gave them the opportunity to review the handbook in advance, and then we went through page by page to answer any questions that were of concern. It opened up many channels of communication that went far beyond the benefit of a simple employee handbook in many ways and opened up the door of communication that was somewhat closed for a period of time. So that was a wonderful experience to have with that bank. We also provided a job description template and data collection tool to the designated project person and coached that individual in securing and developing draft job descriptions. The bank recognized that the job descriptions were old and outdated and weren't keeping pace with the changes in the industry. At that juncture, they didn't necessarily want us to come in and do the job descriptions because they needed some ownership at the individual employee level. So we provided that templated tool and coached and mentored the individual through the process, which ultimately was highly effective. Everyone was very responsive, and there was a lot of learning that was able to take place at the same time. Also in year one, we leveraged the newly developed and accurate job descriptions to conduct a compensation analysis. That compensation analysis allowed us to create a base compensation structure for the bank that had minimums, midpoints, and maximums that gave guidance in terms of compensation administration. It also allowed them to evaluate the current pay practices within the bank. Were they underpaying relative to midpoint? Were they overpaying relative to midpoint? Were there any outliers in the organization that they needed to be concerned with? Outliers below a certain level could be a flight risk at a time where a flight of talent can be very damaging to a community bank. On the other hand, someone who's being paid overly aggressive within the market, what is the concern that the organization would have in that particular regard? Of critical importance was the need to align the compensation with the competitive pay and also to align that with the compensation philosophy of the bank. Because in each situation, there's the base compensation and then there's total compensation. And it's critical to have a discussion about the philosophy of where we want to position the bank. Are we going to lag the market, meet the market, or lead the market as relates to each component of compensation, whether it be base compensation, incentive compensation, any type of prerequisites that you might have, and, of course, the benefit package that you carry forward. Also in year one, we provided day-to-day advice to the client as needed. Again, referring to that just a phone call away. What's happening on a day-to-day that you just want to have a touch base with another individual with a fresh set of eyes who may bring a level of objectivity to the table, because we know when those situations develop that sometimes we're so close to the situation when we're in the throes of it that there may be other options that we're simply not seeing. In year one, we went on site to the bank for 2.5 days a month, and we were available by telephone and email any other time a question surfaced. So in year one, we hit the big rocks in the jar, so to speak. We were able to help the organization identify and prioritize and tackle some of those higher level priorities. In year two, we continued advancing the function and working with the individuals within the bank to do that. In year two, we were able to effectively assist the bank in developing a performance management system. We trained management on the appropriate approach, and throughout the year after the training, we reviewed a sampling of reviews from each manager to, again, provide individual coaching and development to strengthen them as a leader in the organization, enhance their communication with their employees, to ultimately build their credibility within the organization as they each look to grow and develop in their respective roles and responsibilities. Employees were very responsive to that. They were glad to have some consistent level of feedback, and if we craft it in the right way, it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative situation, one filled with conflict or concern, and moving forward in the process, everyone knew the expectation and had the appropriate perspective. We also assisted the bank in staff planning in light of some anticipated turnover due to some retirements that would be coming forward in the future, that enabled them to plan for the future, look at their demographics, where the gaps and the holes might be, what competencies might be needed, so as they were to move into the recruitment process, they'd be well positioned to clearly articulate what their needs are. Associated with that staff planning, we also reviewed the organizational structure and made modifications in light of how things could be restructured to optimize efficiencies and ensure capacities of individuals were hit and to keep the workforce engaged. Again, we provided that day-to-day advice, and we went on site for a half a day per month, and we were available by telephone thereafter. In year three, which I don't have listed here, we continued, maybe, we'd go there every other month for a short period of time. We would do our touch bases. Business cards were given to all the senior management, so if they had any questions, they could certainly reach out. And at that particular juncture, we had also identified an individual in the organization that could be coached to handle much of the day-to-day as they went forward. Even though they weren't truly that dedicated HR professional, they had the availability to pick up some of those roles and responsibilities and look to us for some special support. I would like to pause now. So that's our approach, and I certainly want to be responsive to any questions that you may have. So I'm going to put on our For More Information slide, and I'll look to Mary to ask if any questions have come through. Mary?
We did have a question that asked if the handouts would be available that, would be help in discussing the process with management. I am planning on sending that out after today's presentation. We had another question that was, you may have provided this information, but I missed it. Does the review and update of employee handbook and HR policies include a continued monitoring for compliance as HR laws change and updates to corresponding policies?
Great question, and thank you for asking that. One of the things that we'll want to do is establish what our relationship looks like with you. So therefore, if you would like us to review that employee handbook on an annual basis and to share changes in significant employment law situations that will be notable and something to be captured with your employee handbook, we can certainly do that. We have some banks that wish to have more of a hands-on approach, more of that supportive role in terms of ensuring ongoing compliance, and we have others who like to absorb that role individually. So as I mentioned, all services will be tailored, and we will work very closely with you to understand specifically your needs and how you wish to have those that relationship managed into the future. Thank you for that question. Wonderful. Mary, other questions?
Yes, I have one that's coming. Let me just put it here so I can read it. It's a little small on the screen here that I use. So, okay. Are all services included with the cost, or do you buy each a la carte?
Well, again, that's something that we would work with you on. We generally want to start with the human resources review, and there is a fee for the HR review that when we have our discussion and dialogue individually, we'll be able to identify what that is. And thereafter, if you're taking an ongoing support, well, perhaps you want us on site one day a month or twice a month as indicated in our case study, that will have a certain cost associated with it. Or you may be more inclined to do a specific project focus, at which point we'll talk about what that specific project might be. Or you might want to engage our service on an hourly basis, meaning as an as-needed basis is probably a better language, as an as-needed basis. And we can certainly work with you to craft the appropriate strategy. Again, we want to make sure that our strategy and our approach meets your needs. So we'll work with you closely to identify what would be and what would not be included. There's not a one-size-fits-all structure here because we want to make sure it's unique to you.
And I think that kind of addresses this next question, too, where they ask, can you share any pricing information?
I think I'd like to handle that individually if we could, because every situation is unique. And I think that would probably be the best approach that we could take, is have an ongoing conversation. And my contact information, as you can see, is on the screen. I encourage you to reach out. We can talk specifically about your situation.
All right. Next question is how is the review done? Employee survey or just a review of current policies and handbook?
Great question. We get involved. We conduct the HR review, and we have a checklist that takes a look at all the various areas. So in advance of the human resources review, I would request your employee handbook. I can't think of my checklist. I'd request your employee handbook, number of employees. We get all this information. We take a look at job descriptions. We take a look at your compensation structure and design, your performance management tools, the types of employee communications that you have, the type of training programs that you engage in. We'll take a look at we'd review all that information before we came on site. And then once we got on site, we'd want to sit down with a couple of key players. So like your CEO, your senior team, if you will, and maybe some of your employees. We'll want to talk to the happy employees perhaps, and we always have that somewhat disgruntled individual who has a very strong opinion, that informal power, if you will. We're going to want to talk to those folks as well. So we can help identify what is and is not working well. We'll review personnel files to see if there's any concerns with those as well. So it's a very comprehensive approach. We will not do an employee survey. We find that is not effective in getting to the HR review, but really tackling and talking with the people who tend to leverage the service of human resources within your financial institution. Great question. Mary, any other questions? I certainly want to be respectful to time. It is a little after 10:30. We promised a half hour.
And that is all I have right now that have come in. But as Julia said, on the slide here, we do have her contact information. So please feel free to reach out to her, and she'll be happy to answer any questions that you do have.
So thank you, everyone, for the excellent questions today and your time.
I have one more question that just came in. Is there a base comp cost just for HR review that would have some place to start?
So base comp review?
I think what it is they want to know if there's a base cost.
For the HR review?
Yeah, and I think you would like to talk to them individually because that is going to depend on how big your organization is. I mean, you get a small bank, it's going to be a lot less than...
A little bit less. Generally speaking, I think we're targeting probably right around that $6,500 cost price point, but certainly we'll have extended conversations. So I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm just hedging my bets because I don't know the organization asking the question in terms of size, complexity, et cetera. So I hope that gives you some bit of information to help you move forward.
But there again, talking to Julia individually on that, and she would be able to give you a better idea.
Absolutely. Well, again, I'd like to thank everybody for their time and attention today. If any questions surface or you'd like additional information, don't hesitate to give me a call. I certainly want to have those personal calls with you to discuss how we can be of support and assistance. And we certainly look forward to the opportunity of working with you. Thank you so much, and have yourself a terrific day.
Have a great day.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.